And it was about then that we had a major exodus of people that left. In fact, about half the people in the church left. And I went and saw Bard. I said, what do I do? He said, well, you need to go visit all those people who leave. I said, I don't want to visit them. They don't like me. And I'm not sure I like them either. And he said, no, you got to go visit them and find out what the deal is, what the problem is, so you can fix it. So I did. I made appointments, went and saw them. And every place I went, it was the same thing. Their answer, their reason for leaving was they didn't feel like I loved them. And I didn't know how to fix that. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it meant I had to hug them. I wasn't particularly into that. But I thought, if I've learned how to do weddings and funerals and the rest, I guess I can learn how to hug people if I need to do that. But it was just every time I talked, that was the issue. And really what it boiled down to was what my wife said. She said, I could offend more people from my office to the pulpit than anybody she knew. And I didn't say anything to them. That was the problem. I just figured I didn't have anything to say. I really wasn't into chit-chat. I was thinking about my sermon anyway. And I just was, as my wife said, socially retarded. And offended people and irritated people, and I didn't do it on purpose, just the way I was. And so I thought, well, I went to some seminars. I went to big church seminars and got some books on church growth and started some programs, worked harder than I'd worked before, and the church grew back up some more, and then we had another exodus, and pretty much the same thing, from 200 to 100 people. And I didn't know, I didn't need to go do the interview. I knew what I'd hear. It was the same old problem. And so I worked harder. My dad's motto was there was nothing you couldn't accomplish if you were just willing to work hard enough. And so I worked harder, put in more hours, started more programs, read more books, went to more seminars, and make a long story short, went through it again. And at the end of 1988, we had 88 people come into church. And I was very, very burnt out and discouraged. And the really bad thing is my dad had sold the farm to my brother. I was looking in Hoard's Dairyman for herdsman jobs at dairies. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I just couldn't keep doing what I was doing. I just wasn't wired for it. I didn't like people, and they didn't like me. As long as I could just stand up here and preach to them, I did all right. It was when I had a visit with them that I got into trouble. And it was about then I got a letter from Dr. Joe Aldridge at Multnomah, and he said something about Oregon being the least church state in the United States, and Marion County being the worst county, and that we needed to get the pastors in Marion County to pray. And they had the first ever prayer summit over at Cannon Beach and invited me to go. And there were several things in the letter that I didn't like. One of them was there was no agenda. I hate things with no agenda. My wife says I don't even go to the bathroom without first making a goal to do it. That's an overstatement, but... that there was these guys from all these different denominations. Now, I basically had grown up in a conservative Baptist church. I wasn't sure anybody else was even saved. And so to go over and spend 4 days with these guys praying together, I wasn't sure what they were going to try to get me to do or whatever, but there was nothing about this thing that appealed to me. So I threw the letter in the garbage can, and a couple of days later got a second one, and they said a fellow or a company, somebody had given some money as a grant to pay the way of those pastors of small churches that didn't have a lot of money, and you could apply and get it. So I did. I thought, well, and I got, they said they would pay the $179 or whatever the cost was, and I thought, well, this is what I'll do. I'll go, skip the prayer sessions, walk on the beach, eat the food, figure out what I'm going to do with my life, write my letter of resignation, and just kind of get my head clear. And so I went, and I thought I should probably go to the first prayer meeting just to have some degree of integrity. And I went to the first prayer time, and it only took about 15 minutes before God really began to beat me up. And it was sort of like he just turned me inside out, and I saw me. I saw my heart, my motive, everything that was driving me. It just sort of was out there, and it just... I really discovered that what my motive was in wanting the church to grow. And I really did discover that I didn't love people. And it really was nothing about my temperament or my personality. And so for 4 days, I basically cried. I didn't do much of that growing up. My dad was a cross between Archie Bunker and John Wayne. And, I mean, you didn't cry. Hurt yourself, drop the wagon tongue in your toe and break all 4 toes or 4 toes. You didn't fuss. You just kept working. That was the way my dad was. And I was kind of embarrassed about myself. Every time I opened my mouth to try to pray, I just cried. Because of a lot of what had gone on, the emotional burnout that I had gone through and experienced, and all of a sudden this sort of revelation about who I was and what I was doing and all that there was just lots of stuff there. And we went over on a bus, and we came back on a bus, and I got on the bus, headed home after 4 days there, and I was sort of in a quandary about what I was going to do. I'd made up my mind to quit, to leave ministry, because I just thought that somewhere along the line I made a mistake in thinking that God had called me. And I just wasted 13 years of my life. And so I had a yellow legal pad, and I just wrote down some goals. And they all had to do with prayer. The first one, I wrote down I was going to pray for 3 hours a day. Now, it was an interesting number in that my prayer life up to that point was maybe 15 minutes a day at best. So it was a radical jump, but I thought, I got to figure something out. I just finished reading a book. It was an old book. Somebody had picked it up in a book sale, a garage sale. I don't know where they got it, but they gave it to me, and in the cover was 75 cents. That's how much they paid for it. And in the cover, as a bookmark, was a 5x7 card. And on the 5x7 card, there were written about a dozen different names. Martin Luther, 3 hours. David Brainerd, 3 hours. Jonathan Edwards, 3 hours. After every one of these dozen names I recognized was the term 3 hours. Including the biography of George Mueller, of what the book was. So, wow, that seems to be kind of a common number, and so I wrote down that's going to be my goal, see if I can turn things around. And I wrote 6 other goals in regards to prayer. One of them was to pray with my wife, something that she'd been begging me to do, along with others. And I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to really give this prayer thing a shot. It may not change anything in the church, but hopefully it's going to change something in me. Because that was my problem, and I discovered what that was while I was there. And so when I came back, I stood up in front of the church, and I basically confessed to them my prayerlessness. And the worst thing about that particular Sunday is I blubbered all over again. I thought I could certainly get by without doing it, but I did. And I said, I don't know, what I'm going to do, but I know one thing: I'm going to pray. And so we're going to have a prayer meeting tonight in the kitchen, and we're going to have one the next morning and the next night, and we're just going to do this every morning, every night in the kitchen, and all I want is 1 or 2 to show up. Well, the first one, everybody showed up. They thought maybe I'd gotten saved or something, and revival was coming, and it dwindled down, just 1 or 2 coming, but it's persisted over the years, and God began to work in our church and in my life, and it was the most freeing thing for me to discover that God really will build His church. And it really will bless His church if I would trust Him and rely on Him and pray. And so that was 15 years ago. And so I've been doing it 2 ways. The first 13 years my way, the last 15 years God's way. Now, I haven't changed a whole lot in the sense that I'm still very much of an introvert. And I'm much more comfortable with cows than people still, even though I'm not a dairy farmer. And I like being around people I know. I'm very uncomfortable meeting people I don't know. I do it. I work at it diligently, and I'm trying to acquire more skill in that all the time. But I still occasionally kind of figure out from people that I make them nervous by my inability to make small talk and chit-chat, that kind of stuff. But one of the things that has changed dramatically, and we'll get into that when we get into that part of it, is I really do truly love people now. And that God has done that in me through the avenue of praying for them. And even though some of the mechanics are not there, and it's interesting how we can kind of sense that. I remember back when I used to ask people what they meant by that, they couldn't give me an answer. They just said, I just kind of know that. And people sense when we love them and when we don't. And when we're tolerating them and when we're using them, and when they're really important to us.